Welcome to day 8 of the 12 Days of Celtic Mythology, Season 4. I spent quite a bit of time last night reading your answers to the question I asked on day 6. Seems like a lot of you know a lot about the practices of the bards and Fili and about poetry and other good things. I was really impressed. And I hope some of you will take maybe my Taliesin Connections class in May if you like poetry. In spite of your vast knowledge, a bunch of you got your first question mark because you didn't actually answer the question I asked. You just wax lyrical about poets and poetry. Now, a question mark or two won't knock you out of the running. A bunch of them might, especially if you end up like missing a day or something. So I'm just saying, be careful to listen to the question. I ended up going back and listening to the question I asked just to check what I actually said, in case I didn't say what I intended to say. And while I might have stated it a wee bit more clearly, some people did understand it, and I don't think what I said was that bad. The question was, what has poetry got to do with stories of salmon and shape-shifting? Not, why do Celtic people like poetry, or why is there poetry in myths, right? Which was what a lot of people gave me an answer to. Now, I seem to have been getting a bit relaxed about giving classes away this year or making wild promises to people. So I've said to one or two people in the comment section that if you were to go back and fill in a day or two that you missed, I might have a look at that. If you feel that applies to you, you can do that. Now, listen carefully though, so I don't want anybody to be unhappy later if they don't get picked. This only really applies if you missed like days 1, 2, and 3 or something, that bit at the beginning because you didn't know about the challenge at the beginning. Okay, so if you just came in a bit late, that's okay. All the other days need to have been done at the proper time. So when you write your day 11 answer, day 11, you need to remind me to go back and look at what you've done if you're somebody who's filled in those early days later. Please don't bother to do that if you've been late lots of days or have lots of days missing. But if you missed the beginning because you came in late and you've been doing the challenge since then, like I say, I'll have a look at it. That's the best I can do. Right now, I'm not making any promises, but I'm pretty motivated to give classes away, so you never know. Whatever I decide about things, it won't be on a whim. I'll try to be as fair as I can. I know a lot of people have trouble affording classes, and I'd also just call your attention to there are a lot of classes that are pay what you can over the years. Those might be $20, $25 for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. So that's a pretty good deal. You could save up your pennies if you see a class in the offing that's pay what you can. It's not going to be that expensive, but hopefully we'll get lots of classes given away. Yesterday, we heard a bit about Taig McCain, the second guy who met killer sheep. I love that story. I'm always quoting bits of that story. It's got Cleena Fairhead and her birds. It's got weird concepts about the afterlife. Oh, it's not just killer sheep. So today we're going to look at another little story about Taig. Different story. And we're going to meet another animal. So this is a European badger. There are badgers in North America too. They're a bit different. And a lot of people have never seen one anyway. So this is the animal in question. They're hefty things that live in communal underground dens called setts. They're mainly nocturnal and they're omnivorous, a bit like bears. They'll eat all sorts of things like grubs and insects and dead things and, whatever they find. They're also seriously cute, although they can be quite fierce if they're cornered. So Taig had a son called Cormac. Now, hang on tight, because there are going to be a lot of repeating names today. So Taig had a son called Cormac. This is not the famous King Cormac, son of art, right? And it is also not the Cormac who wrote Cormac's glossary. We're talking about Cormac, son of Taig here. But the little story I want to look at comes from Cormac's glossary. So we're going to get all scholarly today. First of all, who is Cormac, who wrote the glossary? He's not Taig's son. So that Cormac was both the King of Munster in the south of Ireland in the late 9th century, but was also a bishop and a scholar. Interesting character. But it was a long time ago, so it's a bit tricky to separate history from legend about Cormac. What we really know and what we only think we know. I had a comment from somebody yesterday complaining about all the Christian things I've been mentioning. Well, that's just a reality. They were there. I'm 100% non-Christian myself, but I'm not just going to throw out a huge chunk of Irish or Welsh culture because it has some Christians in it. I feel like it's up to us, as pagan scholars, to look at all the evidence and learn to see everything in context. Anyway, so Cormac's glossary is a kind of a dictionary, what people sometimes call an encyclopedic dictionary. So more than just the definition of a word, also information about the topic the word refers to. Now, it's the 9th century. We don't even have that much Irish material, which is that old. So to have something like Cormac's glossary with over 1,000, I think it's something like 1,400 early Irish words explained, it's a real gold mine. And if you think it's going to be all Christian BS, it's not. Cormac is happy to refer to Breed and Manannán MacLír as deities. They might not be his deities. He might not believe in them, but he's a scholar, so he reports it honestly. But we're interested in what he has to say about the other Cormac, the son of Taig. He's explaining in this entry how Taig's Cormac got his nickname Galliang, which basically means that he has dishonored himself. So here's the entry as translated into English by Alan McInvert. So this is Cormac's glossary speaking. Galliang, that is galang, in other words, he's giving two spellings here, that is a fouling of honor. It was applied to Cormac, son of Taig MacCain. He made a feast for Taig, his father. There were 100 of each kind of animals at it, except badgers. Then Cormac came to a badger set, so those are the burrows where the badgers live. He thought it slow to wait for it to be demolished, so he obviously had servants with him who were going to dig the badgers out. So he called them out under the protection of the honor of his father Taig. The badgers came to him. Then Cormac killed them, 100 of them, and displayed them at the feast. Taig's heart shuddered at it, and he refused it. In other words, he wouldn't eat the feast. He afterward found out what had been done and called his son by this name, Cormac Gallang, in other words, somebody who's dishonored themselves. So when he heard what was done, this must refer to, he called him out under the protection of the honor of his father. So McInvert mentions quite rightly in his paper here, Taig MacCain and the Badgers, that this is a bit of folklore used to explain Cormac, son of Taig's unfortunate nickname. But the real mystery is, what's going on with these badgers? Why is Taig upset? And why did they come out of the badger set when they heard his name? So McInvert says this: badgers have long been eaten in Ireland. Now he's written in the 1980s and still are occasionally. And there's no suggestion in the older literature or in folklore of the sort of taboo that is found, for instance, in the case of horse flesh. So most Irish and Britons won't eat horse. We don't know why, we just don't. Yet we are told Taig's heart shuddered at the feast, by implication because of the presence of badger flesh, and he refused it. It was only afterward that he found out that Cormac had sullied his honor by killing the badgers when they were under his, Taig's, protection. And why should the badgers have left their set under Taig's protection rather than under Cormac's? In the Book of Leinster, we have an explicit example of a food taboo. So he's going to take us on a little bit of a side trip here. Cuchulainn is riding out to battle. He finds 3 witches on his path. They had cooked a lapdog with poisons and charms on spits of rowan. Cuchulainn is in a quandary. It is taboo for him not to visit an open-air cooking place to eat. So when Celtic people cooked out in the open, they expected people to come and eat with them. It was part of their hospitality ritual. But it was taboo, in other words, he was under a geis, for him to eat the flesh of his namesake. So cu, of course, means hound or dog. The lapdog they were cooking was undoubtedly a dog, and Cuchulainn was the dog of Culann. Consequently, they were namesakes. So Celtic studies involves a lot of linguistics, and the author goes on to demonstrate that the name Taig means badger, although it's no longer the usual Irish word for a badger. He shows how some animal words have changed in the Indo-European language family, and in many languages, a word similar to Taig does mean badger. So this has cultural implications. This thing of not eating a namesake animal, or what we might call a totem animal, is prevalent in some cultures. It's not really thought about or spoken about in Irish culture, at least not much, except for this story about Cuchulainn. So this is the one that's always had the attention. So finding another example of this suggests that this concept may have been important in Ireland. It also points to the animal a person is named after having slightly more importance, maybe at some kind of supernatural level. So Macaverde goes on, personal names, which are animal names, are a recognized feature of Celtic nomenclature, in other words, naming customs, as in many other societies. Without going beyond Irish itself, we have Mathian, bear, lai, calf, bran, crow, dovarchu, otter, and numerous composite names in Cu, e.g. Cu Connacht, the hound of Connacht, or Cuchulainn, come to that. This would appear to have happened in the case of Tasgos. This is his reconstructed Indo-European badger word, and far more completely, since Welsh and Breton have replaced it with the same word as Irish. Irish broch, Welsh broch, Breton broch. This does not mean, however, that Tasgos did not survive for a considerable time by the side of broch and its cognates. The normal words for horse in Irish and Welsh are cognates, Irish capel, Welsh keffel, and the descendants of Indo-European equos have disappeared from the modern languages. Yet Irish ech is amply attested in the older language, and in fact it's still the word for horse in Scottish Gaelic. A constantly recurring feature of societies using such sets of names is that when a particularly illustrious member of the tribe bears such a name, it is taboo for tribe members to use the word for the animal in question. In other words, you don't want to create confusion between somebody like a king who might be named after a bear or a horse or something and the animal itself, because that might seem disrespectful. A substitute must be sought. This is almost certainly what has happened in the case of the Irish art, originally meaning bear, but with an impeccable Indo-European pedigree and a Welsh cognate arth still in flourishing existence. It has survived in Irish only as a personal name. When you're reading Celtic mythology, whether it's Irish or Welsh, it's good to look closely at the names of the characters you're interested in. Look them up in historical or even modern dictionaries and see what the name means. It can often help you understand the character. I've got a video somewhere about online dictionaries of Irish and Welsh and so on. I'll try and find it and link it for you. Now, here's today's question. Are there names of characters in Irish or Welsh mythology that you know the meanings of their names? Do you ever look them up? That's really all I want to know. You don't even need to give me a name. I'm just curious to know whether you think about this, whether it interests you. If you want to say more, you can. Just want to know if you're paying attention to this at all. But let me tell you a real story. This is the story of another man called Cian. So we've had three Cormacs now. We have two Cians. He's just a young man in our story. So there was a terrifying giant at one time, known as Balor of the Baleful Eye. Now Balor had an eye in the middle of his forehead, which had the power to burn anything it looked at. He kept his eye covered with 9 shields of leather and 7 shields of bronze. It took 4 men to raise each of the bronze eyelids by means of a polished ring that was attached to it on a pulley. And each of the shields of bronze had a lock on it, just in case, because Balor was a careful man. Now, there was a prophecy that if he could be killed at all, Balor might be killed by a son of his only daughter, Enya. The prophecy was a complex one. It seemed that this entirely hypothetical grandson could only kill him with a weapon red hot from the forge of the smith Gavnu, and only if that spear was thrown at the moment the last eye shield was opened. And even then, only if he was standing on the hill called Windu, the Black Back. So you would think that would be safe enough. But in the mind of Balor, it all came down to one thing. He had better keep his daughter Enya locked up so there wouldn't be any grandsons. To the end of this, Balor had built a tower onto his castle, which rose from the frightful sea cliffs of Tormor, where Enya was guarded by 12 maidens, who were under strict instructions to never so much as mention anything about the existence of men to the innocent girl. Balor kept these women behind 7 locked doors, to which only he possessed the keys, and he would take them food each night, unlocking and locking each of the 7 doors as he passed through them. And so, by this means, Balor hoped to preserve his life, because Balor was a careful man. On the mainland, opposite Balor's stronghold, was the hill known as Drumnacheni, the Ridge of Fire. And it was here that the smith Gavnu had his forge, and the weapons forged by Gavnu were known to be the truest, the straightest, the hardest tipped, and the most deadly in all of Erin. Now it happened that Gavnu was in possession of a wonderful cow known as the Glasgowan, the grey cow of the smith. She was the first cow that was in Ireland, and there was a rumor that she might actually be the sister of the smith, who was under an enchantment. Gavnu had a magical halter, which he kept hanging up in his forge. And the glass would return to this halter each night, no matter how far she traveled in search of food and good grazing during the day. In this way, Gavnu was able to work at his forge without constantly minding the cow. And that was just as well, because the glass traveled every day through 3 provinces of Ireland, I'm not sure which 3, as she grazed, and whatever vessels the poor people of the country brought to her, she filled them without limit. So she was propping up all the poor people who didn't have a cow themselves. Wishing to keep the smith from his forge, lest another part of the prophecy be fulfilled, Balor managed to steal the magic halter. Now, poor Gavnu was obliged to follow the cow on her daily peregrinations around Erin, holding on to her tail lest she escape. At night, he locked her up in the forge. One day, some brothers came to the forge asking for spears to be made. They offered to watch the cow while Gavnu worked. Gavnu was skeptical, but he agreed. But as he was finishing the last spear, the youngest of the sons, a lad called Cian, allowed the glass to wander out of sight, and she ran to the halter which was with Balor on Tory Island. So Gavnu swore that he would have Cian's head for his carelessness, but the lad begged for time to recover the cow, and Gavnu agreed. So Cian ran down to the shore to look for signs of the Glasgowan, and it was while he was on the beach that he saw Manannán mac Lir coming toward him in a coracle. And Manannán agreed to help him, and he rowed him over to Tory Island. He told Cian of a girl in the tower and the locked doors, and he gave him a cloak of darkness, a cloak of invisibility, telling him to put the cloak on and follow Balor through the many doors unseen. He instructed Cian to make love to Enya, and then to the other 12 women as well. So Cian did all this, and he courted the girl, and he made love to her, and then he made love to the others too, because that way they would be afraid to tell the tale to Balor, because they were all guilty. The next day, Cian donned his cloak of invisibility and followed Balor out through the locked doors once again. When it came time for the women to give birth, for Cian had impregnated all of them, Cian and Manannán returned to carry the babies away, lest Balor find out what had happened. You might be wondering about the cow about now. Hang in there. Enya's child was wrapped in a fine, beautiful cloth, and the other 12 babies were bundled together in a large blanket, which Cian wrapped over his shoulder and secured with a big Celtic brooch pin. But as Cian was stepping into the boat, it was tossed by the swell, and the pin holding the blanket, ping, gave way, and the 12 babies fell into the sea, where they became seals and swam away into the waves. Holding tight to Enya's son, they made their way back to the mainland, where Cian gave the boy to Taltu to foster. Now the child was well loved by Taltu, but although he lived, he didn't thrive. In time, Manannán advised Cian that it was only by receiving a name from his grandfather that the boy would prosper and grow strong. But how could this be achieved? As it happened, trees did not go well at all on Tory Island, but there was nothing Balor desired as much as he desired apple trees to grow there. So Manannán gave Cian magical apple seeds from the other world, and Cian went to Balor as a gardener. When Balor saw that Cian had a boy with him, he was reluctant to hire him. But Cian said that he was a widower, and he promised that the boy would be no trouble, and when he told Balor of the wonderful apples that would soon be growing, he agreed. The payment Cian asked for was the glass gowan and her halter. So the trees were planted, and they grew at an astounding rate. And one day Cian was bringing a large basket of apples into Balor's court, and he tripped over the threshold, spilling them. Apples rolled everywhere, and the servants ran to gather them before Balor got angry. However, the boy, who was always at his father's side, picked them up so quickly that Balor, even Balor, laughed and called him Lu Lavada, little long arm. And with that, Cian took the boy and left Tory Island, saying that he would collect his wages later. And as he left, the trees vanished. The young Lu was now given to Manannán for safekeeping, and Cian returned to Tory to ask for the cow. Balor refused. But Manannán had told Cian that this would happen, and that he must demand judgment, and ask for Enya to be the judge in this matter. Well, Balor agreed to this, assuming that Enya would side with her father, on whom she was entirely dependent. Enya was given the halter and told to cast it down from the tower to whoever was in the right, as far as she knew. And she threw the halter to her lover. Cian then made his way to Govnu's forge, leading the cow by the halter. He wasn't there long when Manannán arrived with Lu, who was now an impressive young warrior, with the sun flashing off his breastplate and his armor, and Manannán warned them that Balor was angry about the loss of the trees and the cow, and that soon he would stand on Muindu and raise the shields on his eye and burn all Ireland if the spear was not cast at just the right moment. Now that the halter was safe with Govnu, he was able to work at his forge once more. He took his hammer and his tongs, his anvil and his bellows, and he went down to the side of Muindu, where all was made ready, and soon Balor appeared. Not knowing that he had a grandson, he incautiously mounted Windu and his 4 men began raising the 7 bronze eyelids one by one. Gavnu heated his forge and began hammering out a spear, and Lu watched the scene unfold with the calm, deadly focus of a heron waiting for a fish. The bellows blew the charcoal hotter, and Gavnu put the tip of the spear into the white-hot heart of the forge, and Balor began to remove the 9 leather shields from his eye. And just at the moment that he raised the final shield, Lulavara pounced like a lynx on the spear Gavnu had made and cast it into the eye of Balor with one sure, almost surgical movement. Balor was dead. So the thing about the seals is interesting. As you might have noticed with Taig, son of Cian, how the name Cian looks and sounds in proper Irish, the Cian becomes Cain in Mac Cain, yeah? Son of Cian. And in some versions of the story that I just told you, Cian is actually called Cain or Mac Keneally. And in his fabulous book about Selkies called The People of the Sea, the folklorist David Thompson notes how in some coastal communities in Ireland, people with these surnames, O'Kane and Keneally and McKeneally and so on, were under a taboo that they should not kill or butcher seals. So I think Mackenverd is on the right track. So I hope you enjoyed that little story and that you're thinking a little bit about all these animal name taboos. It's quite interesting. And that you're thinking about your answer to today's question. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.